But what I've been trying to do in the past few years is like, because I think I was so competitive. I don't know how they would feel. You have to talk to them, but I know for myself, I was so competitive early on that like even though we were all friends, I would say we were all friends and friendly. Like I wasn't I've never been a reach out, you know what I mean? Like I never been a I never been that person, you know what I mean? Especially when there's competition involved, because it's like, nigga, I'm over here doing what I do, you know what I mean? It's almost like working out together. Like I guess in the NBA in the past, it was like that was unheard of. You know what I mean? Like, why would I work out with this nigga? Like, I'm trying to destroy this nigga. You know what I mean? Like, and that was kind of my mentality. That was kind of my mentality early on. It's like, but but as I gotten older, I realized that like, yo, actually, it's what you said. No one is truly my peer or can relate to what I'm going through in life more than these people right here. You know what I mean? Because just in terms of whatever pressures there might be, whatever amount of like celebrity, which is, you know, a whole conversation in itself there might be, family, you know, privacy, boom, boom, boom. Like nobody can really relate to that like these dudes. And I really genuinely fuck with these dudes. So like I've been trying to, you know, absolutely make an effort like as time goes on to like strip the competition from it. Like y'all niggas are cemented forever. You know what I mean? Like I will hope that I'm cemented forever. And if not, I will be, you know, when it's all said and done. You know, in my mind, it's how my mentality is. So it's like there's like the competition part I've stripped away and I'm now on some shit like, man, I'm more interested in the relationship because I also see a time when I'm not doing this. That seems very realistic to me. And in a time when I'm not doing this, I would, you know, I don't want to be like, damn, I never fucked, we never kicked it. You know what I mean? Like, we never really even did nothing. So like, I'm at that point where it's like, I'm more interested in the genuine relationship than before. I was interested in the competition. Before I was just interested in like putting pressure or responding to pressure. You know what I mean? Now it's like, now it's just like, this is what I'm doing. I know your pressure gonna be a whole level of pressure. I know your pressure gonna be a whole level of pressure. Uh, you know what I mean? And that's it. You know what I mean? Like everybody, it's just less competition in my mind. You know what I mean? Because niggas is old, bro. You know what I mean? Like, bro, it's
To wrap up 2024, now that the battle is over and the dust is settled, I think it's time to reflect on things in hindsight and reevaluate receptions to Port Antonio and J. Cole as a whole. And that if you look objectively at Port Antonio with a clear-minded view, that he actually did make a good point. And that hip-hop media and social media is a common problem in more ways than one. This is not to cover up every criticism of Cole ever, but just to say that the dogpiling was completely unnecessary, and that people's reaction to the song kind of prove his point, because there's a huge disconnect between Cole and the internet in terms of explaining why things played out the way they did, even down to disagreeing on facts. And there's levels of miscommunication that's leading to this. One of these layers is bad analysis. This is a pretty obvious one, but this was evident even during the battle. There were just as many debates arguing over what lines meant and what the content of each diss was about, as there were debates about who was winning. And Kendrick is notorious for keeping things vague and ambiguous and leaving them up to interpretation, so you can see how bad those results turned out for people who tend to be lost on these kinds of things. I remember people saying that he said A minor in an A minor on Not Like Us, even though the song is actually B minor and you can't harmonize with a single voice, but whatever. The difference is that people always give Kendrick grace, so even when they misinterpret it positively. One thing you'll notice about people's criticism of the song is that people don't quote actual lyrics as much as they just tell you how the song made them feel. They then impose his intentions based on that. Of course, that's not surprising. There's a community of people working overtime to listen to Kendrick's song over and over again, while they'll only listen to Cole's once through a negative lens. Even if you disagree with him about some of it, some of this just can't be denied. He has the crown snatched away from him for not digging up dirt on another rapper, because that's what this battle was. And of all the criticisms this song got, this part never gets addressed. Take away the specific ways that you justify it about Drake being a terrible person and that he started it first. That's essentially what this battle was. Like, sure, there was a section that believed that things were going too far, but there was also a section that went along with it. And any resistance to how far this battle was going has been silenced since then, even though this is the heart of the premise for what you're criticizing him for. I'd imagine that the "I wouldn't have lost the battle, I would have lost the bro" line only gets interpreted the way it does within the context of people who've been trying to find a diss in everything in the past few months. There were even media outlets that said that they got what he meant but blamed him for wording it that way, because some people didn't have difficulty interpreting this line. And the way in which social media played a part in the general consensus of who was winning. If you've been following Cole his whole career, you know that that was never his values to begin with. So I don't see anything wrong with him saying, "You're saying I can't be number one unless I do this. You made up this rule anyway. I'd rather just rap. You stripped me of my spot and now I'm finally free." Seems like a pretty fair exchange. But people apparently got mad at him about this too. People don't talk about actual lyrics as much as they talk about their feelings and try to impose motivations onto him based on those feelings. For example, people try to act like he's placing himself above everybody else, but they can't point to an actual line where he says that. He admits to being in the battle when he says he pulled the plug, just like he admits he would have lost a bro if he continued. The only motivation that can really explain this is that people just don't want to admit anything positive about J. Cole, and they just want to be mad about something. They spent so long calling him a bitch that now when he talks to you like an adult, you now have to completely flip-flop on the other side of it and tell him that he got his hands dirty. Like, whatever you said about him months ago should still apply, but flip-flopping on your stance of him almost entirely seems to be in reaction to just being in the opposite of whatever he says. And he didn't say anything that wasn't true. Yes, by comparison, objectively, Kendrick and Drake got their hands dirty more than Cole did, and were both praised for it. So yeah, he is telling the truth if he says that he drew the line about how far he was willing to go. And then there's people that's getting mad about the "they wanted blood" part. Now let's talk about that and the "my friends went to war and I walked away with their blood on me" part. If you were in high school and the teacher gave you a writing prompt that said, "How does he use blood as imagery in this?" would you take it literally, or would you understand that he was using it as a metaphor? Because even the wording here is exactly what he said in his apology. And in time, he was vindicated enough that everyone thought they should apologize to him after Meet the Grams dropped. So the way I see it, this is another case of one story has stayed the same and one story is constantly changing. The thing is, nothing has changed about his stance. The only thing that changed was the reason why people disagreed with him. The root of the claim that he's rewriting history seems to be centered around the fact that most people's criticisms of him just aged poorly. It wasn't just that people said that nobody wanted blood, it's that they were saying that he didn't understand what this battle was and it wasn't going to turn into that. They were telling him that this relationship between these two people that he knows personally was wrong. And a lot of the flip-flopping the internet has done since then is well documented, considering how many videos of people apologizing to Cole after Meet the Grams dropped. And the way that Cole describes his reasoning for backing out is the exact same thing word for word that he said on stage. When he was on stage, the part where he says he changed his mind was when he said that he saw the talk on the internet and said they wanted blood. I feel like the root of the bad analysis is people not realizing that when he says the same thing on Port Antonio, they think he's saying this about Kendrick and Drake, even though he specifically says they wanted clicks. Even if you say he's wrong, to say that he's changing his story doesn't really add up. The problem with the "nobody wanted blood" talking point is because people aren't just talking about themselves, they're talking about everybody. You can say what you yourself didn't participate in, but claiming nobody wanted blood is a way bigger claim to make. And this is partially a fandom thing, but Cole's fandom did start piling on with Kendrick haters to try to use this to trash Kendrick's legacy. And I imagine that's the talk he was referring to in his speech on stage. And in case everybody forgot, people wanted Kendrick to diss Cole specifically because he backed out. Not because they think he deserves it, just because they wanted Kendrick to join in on the jokes too. People were specifically adamant about humiliating him. Hip-hop media was speculation obsessed after the battle. After this battle ended, there was a lot of things left unsaid and unanswered questions. So the only answers we're left with was ones based on the critical thinking of social media. So as expected, they ended up doing things like lumping Cole into a battle he already exited out of, and then got mad at him when he responded to this. Social media is a non-stop cycle that always needs to be fed. Throughout the gaps where J. Cole, Kendrick, and Drake are silent, they have to fill the story with something. So in the last few months, they kept making up stories by everybody involved. And a lot of their stories with Cole keep trying to lump him into a battle he already exited by constantly saying that every move he makes is him taking sides. And this beef got sensationalized the way the Biggie and Tupac one was, where it started off as Tupac and Biggie and then conflated to Bad Boy versus Death Row and then East versus West. And in the same vein, considering the number of people involved in this battle prior to Kendrick, and this battle expanding to the rest of hip-hop, now had to decide who they were loyal to. The media, of course, used this to keep people engaged in the battle even after it was over. Every news story was questioning whether every new song was a subliminal diss towards Drake. And within this context, they saw every move that J. Cole was making as him picking sides against Drake. And J. Cole is basically doing what Snoop did during this era and is minding his own business, but that wasn't enough. He was lumped in whether he wanted to be or not. Of course, this isn't new. Cole has whole verses all the way up to first-person shooter where he says that people are thirsty to put him in beef. And people still don't see the correlation between that and what they're doing now. Cole poking holes in the thing they've been saying about him for months put them in a situation where they felt now they had to get defensive and respond, which just led to more bad analysis and misinformation, and then calling Cole confused for not agreeing with their misinformation. And it pretty much leads to a conflict between the internet and Cole, of who remembers what actually happened the most, the outsiders on the internet or Cole, who was actually there. Just to put things in perspective about how fickle the internet is, even when it comes to remembering facts. Hip-hop media and social media has been losing credibility by the week. We're already starting to see people get tired of spreading misinformation, which has stifled the speculation that social media and hip-hop media have been feeding off of. TDE Punch is even tired of the bad analysis that sparked from the Cole debate, and he's on Kendrick's side. And all of the accusations about Cole dissing people keep repeatedly getting debunked, and because people on the internet refuse to be wrong, they continue to argue back anyway. And a lot of this comes from how hip-hop media and social media has always operated. People like to think of social media as a place where everybody just has a bunch of different opinions, but in reality, there's a few select group of influential people that lead the discourse, and there's a bunch of minions underneath who collect talking points based on which team they're on. And it's a lot of sheep and herd mentality. And sheep mentality and strong judge of character don't go well together. And social media has a negative influence on each other. There were platforms that praised the song and agreed with its message, but adjusted their stance because of the loudness of the people who didn't. A lot of people don't reflect on how changing trends is the basis for their changing attitudes towards Cole, and not based on receiving new information. Completely neutral observations about Cole now had to be framed in a negative light, and trying to center it around the myth regarding what happened in this battle. The internet's perception that everything changes based on proximity, and Cole is no different. Depending on the temperature of the battle, Cole was soft, and then he was ripened, and then after Meet the Grams, they apologized. Then after Not Like Us, they said he made a business decision. Then after the heat died down again, then he became soft again. Then after Port Antonio, he became the supervillain that caused this entire 10-year battle by himself and then exited. Just to put into context that the internet's point of view is not steadfast on their point of view on anything, including how they remember facts. And this bad analysis at the top is influencing all the people at the bottom. And now that these rappers aren't doing interviews anymore, you could see what these outlets are like when left to their own devices. A lot of the hip-hop media that gassed up this battle and ganged up on Cole have shown to not be very reliable, and the minions underneath have shown to not be capable of thinking for themselves. And this unfair judgment affected Cole the most, because for better or worse, Kendrick and Drake both got the last word on how this battle was going to affect their legacies, and the last word that Cole got on the subject was the apology. And while he left it alone for months and just focused on his feature run, and managed to have one of the best feature runs of the year, people just kept finding ways to bring up the battle again. This is just another case of hypocrisy from people who are hiding in the anonymous. As much as they wanted him to not talk about it, they did kind of bring him back into this. Because the same media outlets that kept trying to use him for coverage on what was happening post-battle by claiming that he was picking sides were also the same people playing stupid, like they just flat out didn't understand why he chose now to put this song out, even though he's directly calling out things that they were reporting on. And out of all of the opinions that the song is getting, very little people actually took accountability or took responsibility for their part in that. And that's not to mention all the dumb ways that people were still trying to stay mad about the battle, and the dumb reasoning they were coming up with for why what he was doing wouldn't be considered competition, even while out-rapping top people. They had Cole in this weird purgatory spot where they didn't know where to put him because this rule that they made up on the spot, they didn't think out all the way through. And even while they think they have some legit reason for why they're criticizing him, most of their criticisms pretty much just devolve into calling him a bitch, which misrepresents his reasoning for exiting the battle in the first place. And it's not like it's completely unwarranted for J. Cole to specifically call out hip-hop media's role in all of this, because that's not hip-hop culture either. Hip-hop media was never this actively involved in encouraging beef to happen between people and encouraging a fight to come out of it. The only one time that that's ever happened was when the Source magazine caused the rift between the East Coast, West Coast, and all the carnage that came after that. Hip-hop media should not have this much say on rap battles, period, because their inclusion in this is entirely selfish, because whether they think they're part of the tradition of hip-hop or not, the only real benefit of this is that they get clicks and views. These media outlets instigating drama just does well with them specifically, and these rappers are right not to listen to them. And Kendrick even put out a song talking about the state of hip-hop media, so this isn't exclusively a Cole thing either. And it makes the point clear that you 100% do not understand what this battle was about if you're still criticizing Cole, because you cannot hold the nuances of this battle and criticisms of Cole in your head at the same time. One is going to have to be sacrificed for the other. Because most of these comments about the battle just devolve into ego, and all of Kendrick's cultural criticisms of Drake get erased. I started to notice this on an episode of Rory and Mal, when the concept of what Drake represents to the culture of hip-hop was brought up, and everyone seems to understand why hip-hop typically has a problem with Drake, and the only person who didn't seem to understand this was Mal. And he's also the most vocally critical of Cole out of everyone. And you can see this example even on social media with how hypocritical people are, with how they'll say things like, I can respect Drake for at least standing on business, but they'll still call him a pedophile. And they'll still laugh at him for getting emotional on stage and feeling like everybody turned on him. They'll still make jokes about him losing his hair and looking like he's aged a few years after the battle and how stressed out he looks. A lot of people's perceptions on Drake's ego flip-flop depending on the context. When contrasting him with Cole, they praise him for standing on business, but then will flame Drake and claim he made bad decisions for beefing with Kendrick in the first place. This is the kind of toxic relationship they have to somebody they claim they respect, and this is what they expected of Cole. And standing on business implies that he's standing on his own merits. Culture vulture stuff aside, Drake didn't stand on anything. He was pressured to jump in this battle the same way Cole was. He was just afraid of being shamed. And who knows what kind of weirdo ways this affects your relationship with Kendrick. Because when you're just an audience, you can pick and choose when this is real for you. You can say things like, this isn't real beef, this is just competition, this is just about being the best, and also talk about how Drake's career is over after this. You don't have to recognize the gravity of this situation the way the people involved actually are. You'll notice that in criticisms of Cole, a lot of people use fight analogies. In this fight analogy, you all are the audience that's instigating drama where you don't have to live with the consequences of it. I've heard people compare hip-hop to the Roman Colosseum, but you do understand that's a criticism of yourself, right? The audience in that analogy were morons, and this is why people's expectations of Cole just don't add up. People didn't think all the way through about what Cole's role in this battle was even supposed to be. The entire reason why this battle is what it is specifically because of a decade-long fuse between two people. Cole's status in hip-hop aside, the hype was not because of J. Cole. Cole's inclusion in this battle was strictly because he was standing next to Drake. If this was just about competition, he has even less incentive to respond if he's doing this on his own volition. People don't want to analyze the situation, and they don't expect J. Cole to analyze the situation. They just want him to remain impulsive, because that's what they do. People will try to make up reasoning after the fact that the other two would go easy on each other if J. Cole was there, which I don't entirely buy, but based strictly on what we know, he was an awkward inclusion. You'll notice that the battle started off with like 20 people, and it got limited to 2. It was always going to be just Kendrick and Drake no matter what. Cole would have gotten overshadowed like every other rapper did. Unless you're this dedicated to dig up dirt, that was going to be the thing that was going to keep you in this fight. That's why I feel like people have to be in denial about this, because there's a reason why it went 3 rounds, and there's a reason why things went off the rails almost immediately. Cole would have been gone early no matter what, even if he did everything people said he should have done and just kept it rap. He eventually would have been overshadowed with the 20 other people. And even if you think that he could make the choice to draw the line at digging up dirt on people and he could just rap, he would still be muddying the waters by getting in between this drama between Kendrick and Drake in the first place. And you can claim he gaslighted you all you want, but whose judgment is more likely to be questionable? An audience who can't keep a consistent thought from week to week, whose opinion has changed on J. Cole 20 different times, strictly based on proximity to other things and not based on new information, or goes out of their way to try to find drama in everything to keep the battle alive since the battle ended, or somebody who said the same thing before and after the battle. People shape their entire ideology of hip-hop based on this battle. People shape their values strictly based on getting the results they wanted. Hip-hop culture is not a thing that's passed down as much as a thing that's passed across. People don't decide what their values are until the moment it matters. And that's mostly because hip-hop culture gets established based on reactions to history than it is based on a rule book that was established from the beginning. And history is always evolving and developing. There were only a handful of rules that were articulated back then. Be original and don't have ghostwriters. The second one will be important for later. When you follow most people's line of reasonings for why they're so mad about Cole, it doesn't take long for you to realize that this issue is less about them having some kind of moral convention or some principles based on the rules of hip-hop, and more that they're being driven by nostalgia, which just leads them to having a bad, disingenuous observation of history and a bad analysis on how this battle fits into that history. Everybody, no matter how many years you've been in hip-hop, is young to the idea of titans battling each other, because it doesn't happen that often. That was part of the reason why everybody was so hyped for this one, and nobody knew how to handle themselves. So even though hip-hop has been around for years, this concept is so rare that there's not really any rules for it. So people started making up rules when things didn't go their way. They were saying things like what Cole did is blasphemy in hip-hop because he apologized, and saying things they didn't believe longer than 8 months ago. People have used hip-hop as a competition in shorthand, but people have never used that interchangeably with battles until the Kendrick and Drake battle. Now, making up rules has become pretty common when it comes to battles. Now that fanboyism has become a huge part of the discourse, people will make up rules to get the results they want. For example, apparently, according to Drake fans, now you can never lie in battles anymore. Or more specifically, only Kendrick can't lie in battles. And in the same vein, people say you can't prove that you're the best until you get into a battle, but only when it came to Cole and only when it came to this battle specifically. Hip-hop was founded in 1973, and nobody believed this prior to 8 months ago. Hip-hop culture has a lot of traditions, and just like most traditions, sometimes people just repeat things that they were taught, but they don't really understand the reason behind saying them in the first place, or at least haven't thought about it much on their own. There's a common trend with most of these media outlets that criticize Cole, where when they start talking about how he's taking competition away by not getting in beef with Kendrick and Drake and not involving himself in the drama, you can see them veering away from their own point and describing all of these other examples of competition that has nothing to do with rap beef or diss tracks, but they just know by the traditions they were taught that these are related somehow. Every single battle that you could possibly reference, even amongst the best, calling yourself the best and squabbling it out was never a motivator for people to battle. You could probably make the argument for Jay-Z and Nas, but for Kendrick and Drake, that's like third or fourth on the list. At best, it would only result in you getting on a song together and you trying to out-rap each other, i.e. Big Daddy Kane or Cool G Rap. Or you might get into a cipher, where there was no room for miscommunication about what that battle was about, and it would never get personal. Competition is not why battles happen, it's why they get promoted. Yeah, that's how we as an audience perceive it, but the rappers themselves get into it because of drama. What, you're going to sit there with a straight face and say that every single battle just so happened to get personal, but originally it was just going to be bars before? And some people were so naive to act like this battle was originally going to be just bars, but Drake made it personal, as if that isn't by design. All diss tracks were personal, and if the audience decided who won after the fact, that was a side thing. The Bridge is Over, No Vaseline, Hit 'Em Up. If you ask anybody who was actually involved in any of those diss tracks about why those diss tracks happened, none of them would say it was competition. There was no crown after it was all over. And every single one of those that I named didn't even have a response. It never turned into a battle to begin with. It was just one song. Even with Takeover, which is usually used as an example for competition, Mobb Deep pulled up on Jay-Z and were about to get violent until Jay-Z had to talk them down and say it was just music. And at that time, hip-hop would have sided with Mobb Deep on that, not Jay-Z's. Nobody called it competition then. Hell, Hit 'Em Up happened because Tupac got robbed and shot 5 times, and he thought Biggie had something to do with it. That's how the battle started. And whenever people do bring up the past, they usually are trying to force it to sound similar to this battle by taking things out of context, or it's just filtered through nostalgia, which frames everything in a positive light and takes out all of the imperfections that came from it that they let slide. If you ask a lot of those guys that you're idolizing, if you ask them about those diss tracks now, even if they're proud of the music, they're also way too mature for that kind of stuff now, and usually would have handled things with way more emotional maturity. I've seen people use LL Cool J dissing Cannabis as an example, but whenever people ask LL about it, he always sounds like a kid in the principal's office. He very clearly isn't proud of himself. And while it's by default seen as hip-hop history, so therefore part of the culture, he's been asked about it multiple times from a bunch of different rappers because the explanation he gives still doesn't make sense to them. And in this nostalgia, Joe Budden tries to include himself in this category about competition, even though most of his antics were seen as a personality flaw at the time, if you remember his conflict with Method Man. The reason why battle rap isn't treated with the same gravity is because they sign up specifically to battle. They could shake hands after it's over, but dissing people is burning bridges. So now people are making up this false dilemma that in order to be number one, you have to take down your own friends, putting J. Cole in a dilemma that no rapper in the history of hip-hop has ever had to go through. Drake and Kendrick have had problems for years, and that's the entire reason why this situation is significantly less complicated for them. Acting like such a traditionalist and talking about the rules exactly why they can't think for themselves and say that a completely normal human emotion isn't a viable reason for someone not to battle. Of course, if you're cool with somebody and you don't have any real issue, then why would you battle? And on concept, nobody would disagree with that because everybody didn't like how wishy-washy he was being anyway. Either piss or get off the pot. If you agree with that, then you should agree with the apology. But to sit there and act like this has never happened in hip-hop when everybody's number one is Jay-Z is part of my point that this is some new age internet rule that's very clearly shaped by this battle. Where Jay-Z did the exact same thing when it came to Super Ugly, and within the very same year called himself the greatest rapper alive, and that went untested. And while the internet doesn't remember that, the thing they do remember is that he lost his battle to Nas. So since when were battles the thing that proved you were the best? He didn't prove anything, if this is what we're going off of. From LL Cool J to now, there was no rule before. The thing about the GOAT discourse is that the way it operates is constantly changing. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, hip-hop was too young for people to have grand ideas about their own legacy. In fact, I'd argue that didn't even start until after Tupac and Biggie died, and their legacies got so mythologized that they became the standard to live up to. In the 2000s, the only two people to call themselves the best were Jay-Z and Nas, two people who were from the exact same era and had enough tenure to have the nerve to say something like that. And then in the 2010s, the rappers of the 2000s that were considered the GOATs of their era were shaped by giving people flowers while they were still here, specifically acknowledging the rappers that died before. This is a phrase that you hear Nori say on Drink Champs all the time. So this current Big Three era is the first time that it's ever happened, are having conversations about their own legacy in real time. In fact, the entire idea of trying to shut somebody's career down in a moment's notice is definitely the short-term memory, impulsive stuff the internet is known for. The entire point of talking about people's legacies is that it used to be cumulative. And people are overplaying the battle aspect of it because, again, battles were drama first and foremost and weren't as instigated as they are now. Nor was it trying to be framed in such a dignified light by labeling it as competition. It's not that hip-hop doesn't allow you to make mistakes. The internet doesn't allow you to make mistakes because it's hypersensitive and driven by outrage. The entire reason why battle rap as a sport, is considered the metric to prove who's the best is because it strips away all of the spectacle. It's just two people standing in front of each other, trying to out-rap each other on the spot and embarrass the other. Diss tracks has the protection of a bunch of other spectacle that ends up taking more of the attention. And let's make something absolutely clear. Kendrick did out-rap Drake. He did not win because he out-rapped Drake. As far as people actually breaking down bars, only 20% of the people who are actually hip-hop heads are judging this battle strictly on bars. Kendrick won because he played the internet better, because he provided a bunch of quotables from meme culture. Drake has already taken multiple public L's, including losing a battle to Pusha T. Kendrick waited to diss Drake when everybody else was, so he had the security of public opinion. And he's standing on the shoulders of a bunch of people who dissed Drake before. It was already established when Euphoria came out that he didn't say anything that wasn't already said by other rappers. And Pusha T already established the template for how to destroy Drake, because that psychoanalyzing angle was something he got from the story of Adidon. Now, Meet the Grams is a genius diss track, and only somebody with the talent of Kendrick's songwriting could pull that off. But Kendrick had exposed that Drake had sex offenders on his payroll, and the brokenness of his family, and possibly some other shady things going on in the industry. But the takeaway was, he has a second daughter? And whether the second daughter is true or not, this is playing off of Pusha T's influence. People were not looking for bars, they were looking for plot twists. And they, not like us, swept up the entire battle because it had the most sing-along parts. Now, Not Like Us had bars, but everybody remembers A Minor and He a Fan and OV Ho. The entire reason battle rap would be a test of somebody's talent is because it's stripping away all of the stuff that Kendrick is protected by. The dynamic of Drake being on social media versus Kendrick, the specific way that he timed the release dates, none of that boogeyman hiding in the shadow stuff is going to protect you when you're on stage. The other reason why battle rap proves who the best battle rapper is because it's all about battle rap. You're not having a bunch of side conversations about who had the best feature run, or who had the best verse on this song, or who has the better albums. That's why it makes zero sense to try to use this as a metric for who's the better album artist. And it dumbs down and diminishes the entire art of hip-hop just to battle rap, just for this battle alone. And even though people keep trying to put on this tough act about how hip-hop is all about the sport of it, and that you should just get tougher, the truth is, no matter how mean people can be in a battle, they're never going to say something to ruin that other person's livelihood. Battle rappers can embarrass each other for a day, but then it's on to the next battle rap. As much as we like to praise hip-hop for allowing us to branch off into other ventures, and Kendrick Lamar doing Cash App commercials, there's other reasons outside of losing a battle why Drake was afraid of being called a PDF. And those nuances are being ignored in order to cosplay as battle rappers, even though these rappers aren't. Back to my social media point is that Kendrick staying silent is doing a lot of work here. If anybody remembers J. Cole's conflict with No Name, it was mainly because of a tweet that No Name put out about how Kendrick and Cole are fake revolutionaries. Cole put out a song explaining about how she wasn't helping by trying to drag down other people, and everybody trashed him for it. People don't even remember Kendrick's involvement in all of this because he didn't respond. And this goes the same for the idea that Kendrick never ducked smoke. He very clearly didn't respond to Papoose or Lupe Fiasco, who both dissed him. There was even speculation that Lupe apologized, and Lupe flat out said, "No, I didn't." One was way more up to public scrutiny for the other one, so this one gets swept under the rug. Sometimes the problem with tradition is that people overreact about things that are unfamiliar. People start becoming overly dramatic about the spirit of hip-hop dying or something like that. But the only tradition that he broke was not letting minor communication issues leading to a friendship ending. Like, y'all aren't childish for wanting to uphold tradition. You're childish for trying to uphold this tradition. This does not stop competition or for people being ambitious. And again, I know this is only just because they're the Titans battling, and that's why this has so much hype around it. And that's why people are acting like this. You're idolizing people's adolescence because these guys were basically kids. That's the weird thing about all of this misremembering history, is because it's being displayed by people who's old enough to know better. They keep only bringing up the greatest hits, but not explaining the A, B, and C that led to those situations in the first place. Because on principle, being able to just own up to taking an L like an adult would be the grown man thing to do. But people are now getting to a point where they actually rather the hard part 6 kind of exit rather than the apology kind of exit. There's people who unironically think that J. Cole ended up worse out of this battle than Drake did. Yes, even with the PDF allegations. But how does the line go again? Everything I said was true. I just want you to return the favor. Of course, nobody believed that. But Cole flat out saying, you know what, I took a L. I'm not proud of myself. Y'all cook him way worse for that than somebody who's trying way too hard to keep up appearances. As much as we clown people for lying in their raps, people are actually getting to the point where they prefer being fake. J. Cole is not the first person to apologize, but he's the first person to not try to hide from it. Jay-Z was pressured to apologize. J. Cole was pressured to diss. It's also kind of funny in hindsight how many people clown Drake for taking the Control verse as a personal shot, but now everyone's definition changed all of a sudden. Now the only way to be competitive is to beef with people, and everything else doesn't count. In the very same way they said Drake misinterpreted. Like, what changed all of a sudden? Was it just to argue with J. Cole? Nobody used this battle as evidence for Kendrick being the GOAT. They decided he was years before this, and were rooting for him to win since the beginning. Both Kendrick and Drake's legacies were already long determined way before this battle happened. You only claim this evidence was needed once the battle ended. So this whole you say you're the best and then you have to prove it attitude is completely made up. Kendrick and Drake's fan bases are so ideologically opposed to each other that they had different ideas about what was considered winning in this battle anyway. So this battle was never going to prove anything. The crossover was because Kendrick got Drake to back out himself after the PDF stuff got serious. And if Drake had won the popular consensus, nothing would have changed. Kendrick would have still been the people's champ, even by hip-hop culture standards. So let's not lie to ourselves and pretend that we were really putting our loyalty for Kendrick on the line based on whatever happened in this battle. Back in the day, there used to be top 5 lists where everybody would list which rappers they considered to be their top 5. And everybody's reasons were different. Some people had a group of lyricists. Some people had a group of poets. Some people had a group of storytellers. There was no one way to be the best. And being battle tested was a thing on the side. It was a thing that would add value to your legacy, but it wasn't some automatic requirement. In fact, battles getting this kind of hype is mostly because the titans of hip-hop were battling. And as I mentioned before, this is so rare that it's only happened 2 other times. That's the reason why the term GOAT was never determined based on battles between titans. Because why would there be any room in the conversation for everybody who isn't a titan? And this is the sentiment that comes off as kind of anti-hip-hop. Hip-hop is inherently counterculture. Whenever somebody's a titan, like a Tupac or a Biggie or a Jay-Z or an Eminem or a Kendrick, there's usually going to be some pushback about how much praise they get. There's always going to be a list of talking points that you hear amongst the discourse to say that they're overrated because they don't have X, Y, and Z. And they'll usually list a less popular rapper they consider to be underrated that's way more worthy of that attention. This dynamic is by design, because you become a titan not through hip-hop tradition, but through mainstream crossover appeal. Once you get to that status where white America likes you too, you get elevated above hip-hop. Kendrick got this status from his Pulitzer Prize. Jay-Z got this status when he became a billionaire. Tupac got this status when he became an actor, etc., etc., etc. But this there can only be one mentality unfortunately has led to a lot of dick riding, where wearing the crown means beating Drake in streaming numbers, when this used to be about albums. Just like how you all made up rules just to say that Cole broke them. Was this battle really a Muhammad Ali-Joe Frazier fight the way you kept pretending it was, or did you just build it up in your mind as that? Because all of you hip-hop heroes was trying to act like this was about being the best, have to overlook that one of them has ghostwriters. Sure, you all continue to clown him for it during the battle, but in the moment, none of that stopped you from acting like this was about the best and who was going to take the crown, even implying that Kendrick was taking the crown from Drake. What crown did Drake have? Not only does he have ghostwriters, he also lost his battle to Pusha T. And apparently that doesn't matter because he outstatused Pusha T. But again, Kendrick and Drake's status is doing more of the work here than the competition part of it is. They were willing to compromise to frame this as a Frazier-Ali fight, when in reality it was a hip-hop versus culture vulture fight. People big up to Drake by ignoring that he already lost a battle to Pusha T. So if their principles was that battles were supposed to prove who was the best, that ship has already sailed. They compromised on his ghostwriters just like they compromised on the fact that he already lost a battle before. So trying to shape this as a Ali-Frazier fight was inherently a compromise. If this was really about competition, then it would be about the talent. Even though Pusha is more talented than Drake, Drake dodged repercussions for that battle because he had more status than him. Kendrick was the perfect guy to take down Drake because he has just as much influence that Drake does. If this was really about competition, their Titan status wouldn't be the primary reason why this battle is being hyped over all the others. You'll also notice that when Lil Wayne threatened to get in the booth and diss Kendrick, most people's responses were, "You're one of the best, you have nothing to prove, but you've never beaten anyone in a battle, don't get in the booth." that "you have to prove you're the best by battling" talking point never came up. People are dedicated to misunderstanding J. Cole at every turn. One problem about the end result of this battle is that it very clearly clouded people's judgments about all three of them. Drake was always clowned no matter what he did prior to this battle, but this did put further emphasis on it. People keep calling Kendrick a genius for extremely minor things, and they'll give him grace for standing next to people who are guilty of similar things he accused Drake of doing. And with Cole, they're just dedicated to misunderstanding him no matter what he does or says, and acting like the events of this battle exposed something about him when it really didn't. The audience could never admit that they were in the wrong for having false expectations of him that were completely unfounded, so it had to be his fault somehow, and that's how we end up here. They had to be extremely selective about things he said in the past to claim that he's the one who gave them false expectations, and they had to ignore whole verses and actions in his past that were completely consistent with the apology. And the story they came up with is that he's been doing nothing but brag rapping his entire career, and then when a challenge comes up that's right in line with the thing he's been brag rapping about, he backs out because he got scared. Of course, prior to this battle, nobody would describe J. Cole that way, and nobody who looked at this battle objectively could come to that conclusion that that's why he backed out. He talked about being number one plenty of times, but he never let it get to the point where he was trashing the other two in the big three. In fact, of the three, he was the most vocal about complimenting the others, Kendrick specifically. And when you look at the reception of 7 Minute Drill, there were enough people before and after that song release that said that he wouldn't respond or that it's out of character for him to do something like this. The contradiction here is that everybody's able to see the nuances of Kendrick saying that he's not your savior, and when anybody calls him a fake savior, there's always a list of Kendrick supporters making it absolutely clear that he already said that, but they aren't able to see the nuances of J. Cole's complicated relationship to the GOAT discourse, no matter how many songs and interviews reference this. It was also very clear that people didn't listen to what he actually said in his apology and kept trying to find some ulterior motive behind why he was doing this. The other one is just claiming that he was dodging accountability for 7 Minute Drill, and the outrage behind this is riddled with contradictions. He was trashed for months for this apology, and now he's trashed for the diss. It's completely hypocritical to be against both at the same time. And using accountability is such a strange choice of words for people who trashed him for owning up to a mistake, especially when this song seems to be him doubling down on that decision. Then he came back to say the same thing, knowing full well he's going to get hated again like he did last time. And it's not like if you actually listen to 7 Minute Drill that doesn't tell you the same thing. People like to use 7 Minute Drill as some kind of gotcha moment that he's not as sincere as he claims he is. Like, have y'all actually listened to 7 Minute Drill? Most of it is him putting up a bunch of disclaimers about why he's even in this battle in the first place, and that he doesn't respect dissing people for no reason, and that he's cool with Kendrick and how conflicted he is. How this is just a warning shot to calm everybody down in hopes of defusing the situation. Even the fact that he was gassed up to do this, even the reception that the diss track got was that he was being too timid and needs to be tougher. That detail got erased out of the history of all of this. And he stayed silent about it for months, and then he came back to say the exact same thing. Of all the bad analysis that's come from criticizing Cole, 7 Minute Drill and the apology are the most heavily mischaracterized. But it's also people acting like he tried to start a fight that he couldn't finish and then try to stop it from happening by apologizing for it. He didn't say anything about what Kendrick should do. He just said that he didn't like his own participation in this. He even invited Kendrick to respond if he felt some kind of way. Cole flat out told people that he lost sleep over this, but that apparently wasn't good enough. People had to find some ulterior motive for why he's doing this, as if there was any scheme associated with admitting something like that. He just kept trying to say that he must have been scared, which I don't know why he would voluntarily admit to losing sleep because he felt bad. As a cover-up for this, there's a reason why no receipts pulled up on any of these criticisms people make about Cole, because his actions have been completely consistent the whole time, and receipts wouldn't be on your side. People claim that they've been following Cole his whole career, but every example they give are these cherry-picked examples where he brag raps in the exact same manner that every rapper does, but then ignore whole albums where he represents where his values have always lied. He's repeatedly talked about his principles and what he refuses to engage in, and one of those is dissing somebody for no reason. One of the strangest receptions to Porn Antonio is the idea that he was rewriting history. First is people claiming that he wanted to smoke for years, and their receipts or references is any time that he talked about being the best, which, as mentioned before, is just them making up rules. And the other receipts come from listing any time that he talked about destroying other rappers. But in every single one of those references, a reference to his feature run wasn't too far behind on any of those, so it's obvious what specifically he's talking about. And of course, the obligatory media illiteracy. People's rebuttal to him saying he doesn't want to be a gun was just listing every time he used the gun bar, as this is their attempt at a gotcha. And then there's just a bunch of assumptions that he was sneak dissing somebody because people are thirsty for that kind of stuff. People have actually gone so far as to say that First Person Shooter is an example of this, even though nobody thought this at the time. And this was such a big song, if anybody were to think of it as a diss, they would have thought of it a year ago. So the entire accusation of hypocrisy comes from you making up a rule after the fact, dialing it to 11, and then saying that he wanted this. And when he said, no, I didn't want any of this, you say he gaslighted you. He said that he prioritizes his relationships to the big three rather than just competing with them over a year before the apology. Or on the diss track itself when he flat out says, I made it off of bars, not of controversy. Or his second verse on False Prophets, or his second verse on Middle Child. Like, you all claim that you've been following his whole career, but there's a lot of verses that you have to ignore in order to say that. Aside from the generic expectation that all rappers are expected to be the best, Cole still shouted out the two of them whenever he got a chance. He's also repeatedly gone on record to talk about questioning his own ego with why he wants to be number one. And his entire second verse on False Prophets is doing the exact same thing. A lot of people know about False Prophets for the first verse being about Kanye West, but the second verse was about himself. His relationship to the GOAT discourse was way more complicated than how people are claiming it is. And you can cherry pick lines all day, but actions speak louder than words. This isn't even the first time that he's dealt with confrontation or somebody dissing him. There was a whole F. J. Cole movement at one point that he needed to deal with. His instinct has always been way more focused on conflict resolution than it is on escalating things because of bad communication. He was dissed by Lil Pump, he was dissed by Lil Yachty, and he had a sit-down interview with both of them, and now they're cool. And it's not even like his apology is out of character for him either, or even out of character with the person he's always presented himself as. The thing is, it's not good enough to just criticize him. They have to call him a villain. They need to find an ulterior motive behind everything he does. And they need to claim that anytime he's trying to keep the peace, it's because he's being fake. He even claimed that he was presenting himself as better than Drake and Kendrick as a person. And not only is this way overly reactive, it comes off as kind of insecure. Because no reasonable person would be this hypersensitive to somebody just setting their own values and setting their own standards. The dilemma of people who just need to find something to get Cole on is that Cole is already openly critical and self-reflexive of himself. So people are in competition to try to get him on something that he didn't already admit to himself. So they start going to absurd lengths to try to find something. People called him fake not because they have actual values of their own or because they relate to his values and think he's not living up to them, just because they're mad at him for having those principles in the first place and just needed to find an angle against him. It's literally the same thing that Drake and Andrew Schultz did against Kendrick. The "you're not a real revolutionary" is an angle somebody who has no principles would do. When all else fails, call his values fake. The problem with people's criticisms of Cole is that they're conflating being principled with always being right. They don't know how to recognize him as a three-dimensional flawed human being, so they act like his impulse is always to do the right thing, and he couldn't just make a mistake and catch himself. I guess if he got ahead of it and called himself a hypocrite earlier, all of these criticisms would be swept under the rug. And when people talk about Cole avoiding accountability, as strange as that choice of words is here, or the claim that he's rewriting history, it seems less about getting details wrong and more about trying to tell him what his inner motivations are. It's like they wanted him to take the blame for the entire battle, even though all he did was compliment Kendrick for the 200th time. This is one of thousands of other times he's done this, so that wouldn't have been the catalyst for anything. And this is why vilifying Cole just doesn't make any sense. Cole's role on this has been entirely passive. He got invited by Drake to perform a song. He shouted out Kendrick, who was allegedly supposed to be on the song. Kendrick disses them, and then people gassed Cole up to respond, which Cole impulsively put last minute on a project he had been working on for months, and it didn't even fit the project he was working on. So he backed out for it taking him out of his focus, and now people are mad about him backing out. He's also the one of the three who's willing to pull the curtain back and say that none of this is real. Because one of the differences between him and Kendrick is that Kendrick is a little bit more performance-y about it. He doesn't flat out lie about who he is, but he is willing to put on a show more than Cole is. And Cole demystifies all that by just being a real person in this moment when it's all about the show. And Cole is okay with that, even if it means being hated. And that's been the root of people's conflict with Cole, not just with this battle, but his whole career. And the contradiction here is while hip-hop will criticize Drake's artificiality, the internet prefers that Cole acted more like him. The internet's need to strip nuance out of everything is the exact reason why they demand that Cole be in this battle, even though there's absolutely no place for him. And that's the exact performative line of reasoning that got Drake in this battle in the first place. Because most criticisms of Cole are mostly centered around speculation of things, not things that they actually know. Remember that extremely minor, petty controversy that happened when people talked about him wearing white tees and dressing poor? When you get hated on for stupid things, of course you would develop the instinct to not care what people think. Especially when rap image stuff aside, he squared up with P. Diddy, allegedly to protect Kendrick Lamar, and he's one of the few to do so. But his toughness as a man is strictly centered around whether or not he gets into a battle or not. But I repeat myself, people prefer performance over real life. And then there's just the typical people being bad judges of character. They're now conflating this conflict with all conflict by acting like it's the exact same thing. So they could call him a hypocrite for being in conflict before, even though the reason behind all those conflicts were completely different from each other. And the big difference is that those conflicts were actually real. Also, I think it's just worth reminding everyone that Cole was responding to Kendrick because Kendrick started this. Drake and Kendrick have had history for years, but Cole getting lumped into this, whether Kendrick intended it or not, is on Kendrick. In reality, the call-out was tame enough where he could choose to respond or not respond, but that's his own choice. You can't really get mad about either one he chose. I feel like people keep erasing that fact because they want to play favorites. I do think that's important to reiterate, considering the fact that most people's responses come off as unreasonably hostile and doesn't fit this context at all. Cole has already been on his way out and has been announcing his retirement for a few years now. His main focus has been on promoting his last project. People being dismissive about Cole trying to preserve his friendship with Kendrick say that there's plenty of rappers who've dissed each other but ended up being cool down the road. Cole is already on his down the road. Kendrick went through plenty of different phases to come to the conclusion to diss Drake, just like Cole went through plenty of phases to come to the conclusion of where his priorities are. Of course, if you're only looking at the battle, you're not paying attention to any of this. But people come to these strange takeaways where they try to make broad, sweeping judgments about their character based on how they handled this situation specifically, and trying to act like this represents how he handles all conflict, even when the context is completely different. So it makes sense for this story to end with Cole deciding that you all don't know what you want, and it's best for him to just ignore you and do whatever he wants. And it's probably for the best because the amount of noise that has come out of every minor thing he's done, especially this year, him listening to that would be bad for him in the long run.
It was always respecting because even at its most competitive, you're not going to be competitive with somebody you don't respect. You know what I mean? You're not going to be extremely competitive with somebody you don't respect. So it's always respecting. I think now it's just more of a like a wisdom thing where it's like, yo, you can never have it all. Nope. 100% of the people are never going to say Kevin Durant is the best player walking the face of the earth.
Yep.
100% of people are never going to say J. Cole is the best rapper breathing. You won't get 90%. You won't get 90% to say Drake. You won't get 90% to say Kendrick. It's just never going to happen. You know what I mean? And like, but as a child, and I say child meaning like in your 20s, you think that's attainable. You want all of that. You know what I mean? You want I want no doubts. You know what I mean? And like, now I understand that. Look, I approach my bars from that perspective. I approach my work ethic from that perspective. But the reality of me knows that's unattainable.
Even though I'm a competitor, I feel two ways about competition in rap and hip hop because hip hop has like the potential and at times has been like the most potent art form, the most powerful art form because your ability to say exactly how you feel and not in a vague way like how rock lyrics are or like how, you know, rhythm and blues, like in a real vague, no, rap is like very detailed and this is how I feel and this is exactly what I'm feeling. And so many words in one song. You have that power with hip hop. So it could be the most powerful art form. But I feel like when you throw competition into the mix, it like dilutes it or like it takes away from the art form and it becomes about ego, and which is really just fueled by insecurity. We all, as like, and I can't speak for us all, but I can speak for myself. Or even, I can't speak for Michael Jordan, but I always use Michael Jordan as the example. How can a man be so great to even wearing his Hall of Fame speech, he's still like throwing shots at the guy that made the basketball team
we all
over.
saw that, exactly.
I think it comes from rejection. Like that feeling of rejection was so intense when he got cut from his high school team that he would never wanted to feel that again. He never wanted it. So ultimately, your greatness is fueled by your ego, which is fueling this greatness, is fueled by insecurity. So it's like, that's why I feel a way about hip hop. Is so much insecurity within that competition. So even though I'm competitive, I try to catch myself sometimes like, well, why are you competitive? Like, why do you want to beat somebody so bad?